My name is Camille Doverly and I am 34 years old. And on the morning of my birthday, my mother called me at 7:18 a.m. to ask if I could help set up my sister's party. I want you to understand the timing, not the cruelty of it, the precision. She did not forget what day it was. She called me at 7:18 on September the 14th, which is the same September the 14th that has always been, the same one written on my birth certificate in blue ink in the records room at Riverside Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She knew. She has always known. I said I couldn't make it. I told her I had plans. She said, "Plans?" Like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize. I said, "Plans, Mom. Have a good time." I hung up and I stood at my kitchen counter for a moment, looking at the copper kettle on my stove, and then I picked up my phone again, and I sent one text to my friend Petra. It said, "They're all coming, right?" She said, 43 confirmed. Stop worrying. I wasn't worried. I was just making sure. I need to go back, because none of what happened on September the 14th makes sense without the years that came before it. My sister Renata is 2 years older than me. She is blonde in the way that photographs well, loud in the way that fills rooms, and she has always been, in my mother's accounting, the one worth centering. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe a fact of geography. The river runs north. The mountains are to the west. Renata is the one my mother organizes her life around. I spent a long time trying to earn my way out of that fact. I was the one who called every Sunday. I was the one who drove the 2 hours to Columbus from my apartment in Westerville when my mother had her knee replaced in the spring of 2019, and I sat in that waiting room for 6.5 hours on a Tuesday with a thermos of Earl Grey tea and a book I didn't read a word of. I was the one who took the overnight shifts in her guest room for 4 days afterward, refilling her ice pack, timing her pain medication, helping her to the bathroom at 2:47 in the morning while Renata sent flowers and a card that said "Get well soon. Wish I could be there." Renata was not there. She was never there for the small, difficult, invisible things. But the parties. The parties were Renata's territory. My mother threw Renata a 30th birthday that I still hear about. It was at the Grange Hall out on Lakeview Road. White fairy lights, a catered Italian dinner, a chocolate fountain that Renata later described in her Instagram stories as exactly what I'd always dreamed of. 63 people attended. There was a slideshow. There was a speech. My mother stood at the front of that room with a microphone and said that Renata had always been her greatest joy and her truest success. I was at a table in the back, next to Renata's college friend Melissa and an uncle I hadn't seen in 4 years. Nobody gave a speech about me. I turned 30 in a Red Lobster with my mother and Renata, and 2 of Renata's friends who came along, I think, because they thought there might be a reservation somewhere nicer. My mother paid for everyone's dinner and called it a celebration. She gave me a candle from the gift shop near her house and a card that said, "Wishing you a very special day." The candle was vanilla-scented. I am allergic to vanilla. I know what you're thinking. That's a small thing, the candle. But it wasn't the candle. It was the 11 years of candles. The 11 years of being adjacent to Renata's celebrations while my own life happened somewhere in the margins, in the spaces where nobody thought to look. I am a scheduling coordinator for a home health agency. I manage 42 caregivers and a caseload of over 100 patients. I have held that job for 7 years. I am good at it. I am precise and calm, and I do not lose track of things. I have never, not once, gotten a patient's birthday wrong. I understand now that my mother's cruelty was not the kind that knows it's cruel. That is harder in some ways. She was not withholding to punish me. She was withholding because she had organized her heart the way some people organize a closet, the things she used most toward the front, and everything else pushed to the back, where she didn't have to see it. Renata was at the front. I was somewhere behind the winter coats. I spent a long time being angry at that. Then I spent a longer time being sad about it. And then, sometime around the spring of my 33rd year, I stopped trying to reorganize her closet from the outside. I started building my own. The party planning started in July. I found out about it the way I found out about most things in my family, sideways, from someone who assumed I already knew. My cousin Diane called me on a Sunday afternoon in early July and said, "Are you going to Renata's thing in September?" I said, What thing? There was a pause. The kind of pause that means someone is calculating how much trouble they're about to cause. The party, Diane said carefully. Your mom's been planning it since April. At the Bellworth Room on Chambers. I think they've got a DJ. I sat down at my kitchen table. The leather-bound appointment book I keep for personal scheduling was open in front of me. September 14th was already circled, the way I circle it every year. Old habit. Hopeful habit. I said, huh. Diane said, did you not know? I said, I know now. I didn't call my mother. I let a week go by. I let 2 weeks go by. I went to work. I coordinated 42 caregivers and 104 patients, and I answered 38 emails on a single Wednesday, and I did not once think about the Bellworth Room on Chambers Street, or the DJ, or the chocolate fountain, or whatever my mother had planned. Then she called me. It was a Tuesday evening in August. I was eating leftover pasta at my kitchen counter, and I answered on the second ring because I still answer on the second ring. She said, Camille, I've been meaning to call. Renata's party is September 14th. We're doing it up at the Bellworth Room. It's going to be really beautiful. She's so excited. We need someone to help with setup in the morning. You know how these venues are. Could you come by around 9? I put my fork down. The pasta was penne with roasted tomatoes and basil from the windowsill pot I keep on the kitchen ledge. I noticed at that moment that the basil was getting leggy and I needed to trim it. I noticed the sound of the refrigerator. I noticed that I was 33 years old, and my mother was calling me on the Tuesday before my birthday month to ask me to help set up my sister's party on my birthday. She did not mention my birthday. She did not say, and of course we'll celebrate you too, or we'll make sure it's your day as well, or anything that acknowledged that September 14th was a date that belonged to both of us. Be happy for your sister, Camille, she said, because I had gone quiet. She's put a lot of work into planning this. I thought, Renata did not plan this. You planned this. Renata approved the menu. I said, I can't make it, Mom. I have plans. She said, plans? On a Saturday? I said, yes, plans. She said, well, what plans? I said, my own. There was a silence that I understood completely. It was the silence of a woman trying to figure out how to ask her daughter to reschedule her life without actually asking it. I said, have a really good time. Tell Renata happy birthday from me. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen counter for a long time after that. The copper kettle was on the stove. The basil needed trimming. The apartment was very quiet. And then I opened my leather-bound appointment book to September 14th, and I wrote, party. 40 people minimum. My table. My rules. I had 6 weeks. That was enough. I am, as I mentioned, a scheduling coordinator. I know how to plan things. I started with the guest list the next morning. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee at 6:44 a.m., and I opened a spreadsheet, not a party planning app, not a Facebook event, a spreadsheet with columns for name, confirmed, dietary restriction, and +1, and I started filling in names. Petra Galloway, my best friend since we were 19 and sharing a dorm room at Ohio State, who had called me every birthday for 15 years without missing one. My coworker Jerome, who brought donuts to the office on my birthday 3 years running, and once drove 40 minutes out of his way to drop off soup when I had the flu. My neighbor Wanda, who is 71 years old and has lived across the hall from me for 4 years and leaves handwritten birthday cards under my door every September. My college roommate from junior year, B, who lives in Cincinnati now and drives up for things that matter. My cousin Diane, who had warned me without knowing she was warning me. My therapist's former receptionist, Gail, who I met at a neighborhood block party and became genuine friends with over 2 years of bumping into each other at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I built the list to 47 names, and then I went through it and asked myself, is this person someone who has shown up for me? Not for Renata. Not for my mother. Not for the version of me that exists in my family's telling. For me. I cut 6 names. 41 remained. I did not invite a single member of my immediate family. The venue problem solved itself faster than I expected. I I am 4 years into a 30-year mortgage on a 2-bedroom apartment on Fairview Street with a finished basement that I have never done anything with except store boxes and a treadmill I use twice a year. I measured the basement on a Wednesday evening with a tape measure and a piece of graph paper. It was 22 by 38 feet. It had a utility sink, a side door that opened to the building's back parking lot, and a ceiling high enough to stand under without ducking. I called the building's property manager, a man named Douglas who I've always been friendly with, and asked if I could use the space for a gathering on September 14th. He said as long as I had the cleaning deposit and was done by midnight, he didn't see why not. The deposit was $220, which I paid from the small emergency fund I keep in a separate savings account. I rented 40 folding chairs from a party supply place out on Route 40 for $68. I bought 4 8-foot folding tables at the discount store for $31 each, $124 total. White linen tablecloths from the same store, $43. String lights, 2 strands, $18. Paper plates, napkins, cups, 3 cases of sparkling water, 2 cases of still water, $61. A Bluetooth speaker I'd had for 3 years. I made the food myself.
I want to be clear about this.
I didn't cater. I didn't hire anyone. I made the food myself over the course of 2 days. 2 large pans of baked ziti, 2 sheet pans of roasted vegetables with lemon and herbs for loaves of focaccia, a Caesar salad for 30, a fruit platter, and a birthday cake. The birthday cake was carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. It was my grandmother's recipe, handwritten on a piece of lined paper that I keep in the cedar box I inherited when she died, along with her letters and a handful of other things she left me specifically, not to the family collectively.
Me.
By name. My grandmother had always known my name. The total cost of the party was $342.17. I know this because I am a person who tracks receipts in a spreadsheet. My mother's venue deposit alone was $4,000. I know this because Diane, who has no filter and a good memory, mentioned it on our second phone call. I did not think about that number very much. I thought about it exactly once, on a Thursday evening about 3 weeks before the party, and that was the night I came the closest to calling the whole thing off. It was 9:22 p.m. on a Thursday. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the spreadsheet open and a glass of water I hadn't touched. The building was quiet. The copper kettle was cold on the stove because I hadn't made tea. I just put it there out of habit when I came in from work. I looked at the number column. $342. And then I opened another tab, the way you do when you're trying to talk yourself into something stupid, and I looked up the Bellworth room rental rate. Full evening package, $7,800. Plus catering. Plus the DJ. I sat there for a long time thinking, what are you doing? 43 people are coming to your basement to eat ziti and carrot cake, and you're 34 years old, and you have never once in your life been the person anyone threw a party for, and maybe that means something. Maybe it means what they think it means.
Then I closed the tab.
I thought about the cedar box and my grandmother's handwriting on the recipe card, and the way she used to say my name like it was a complete sentence. I opened the spreadsheet again. I had 43 confirmed. I wasn't calling it off. The 3 weeks between that Thursday and September 14th were some of the most quietly satisfying weeks I can remember. Petra came over the weekend before and helped me string the lights in the basement. We stood in that finished basement with 2 strands of warm white lights and a step stool and talked for 3 hours about nothing in particular, and at some point she said, "I cannot believe you're doing this," and I said, "Which part?" And she said, "All of it. The way you're doing it." She meant the quietness of it. The complete absence of announcement. I had not posted about the party on social media. I had not told any of my family members except Diane, who had called to say she was coming and that she thought what I was doing was, and I'm quoting, deeply sane. Jerome brought balloons on Friday. He showed up at my apartment door at 6:30 p.m. with a bag of gold and white balloons and a hand pump and said, "I have inflated balloons for 3 different kids' parties this year, and I have never once been thanked adequately, so I'm preemptively thanking myself with the free parking I get for helping you." Jerome is the kind of person I have worked alongside for 4 years and have never once taken for granted. He remembered my birthday the year I didn't remind anyone. He put a card on my desk at 8 a.m. That card is still in the cedar box, with my grandmother's recipe. My neighbor Wanda brought a pot of her chicken and dumplings on the morning of September 14th and knocked on my door at 9:15. She said, "I made extra for the people." She is 71 years old and has never once needed an explanation. At 9:18 a.m., my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail said, "Camille, it's Mom. We're heading to the venue soon. I just wanted to. Well, if your plans change, we'd love to have you. Renata would love to see you."
Okay, bye.
She did not say happy birthday. I listened to the voicemail once, standing in my kitchen in the burgundy sweater I'd worn to work the day before and borrowed back for the occasion, because it was the one I felt most like myself in. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter next to the copper kettle. I had a party to set up. By noon, the basement looked like somewhere people would want to be. The string lights were warm. The tables were covered in white linen. The focaccia was in the oven. The ziti was in the warmer I'd borrowed from Jerome. The fruit platter was covered in cling wrap in the refrigerator. The carrot cake sat on the counter with 34 candles I hadn't put in yet. At 2:47 p.m., the first guests arrived. By 4 o'clock, there were 31 people in my basement. I want you to understand what 31 people in a basement looks like when you have spent most of your life being invisible in rooms full of people who knew your name. It looks like noise. It looks like chairs pushed close together and plates piling up and Jerome attempting to start a playlist argument with Petra about whether 90s R&B counted as a dinner vibe. It looks like Wanda sitting in the best chair with a plate of ziti on her lap, holding court with my college friend B about something that had them both laughing with their heads back. It looks like belonging. Diane arrived at 4:22 p.m. with a bottle of wine and the expression of someone who had made a decision on the drive over. She hugged me at the side door and said, "I left the venue." I said, "How was it?" She said, "Camille, there were 9 people there. The caterer was eating his own food at a corner table." I said, "9?" She said, "Plus the DJ, who was also just sitting there." She paused. "I don't think your mom has called you yet because she doesn't want to ask." I thought, no, she won't call. That's not how it works. She'll wait for someone to tell her. At 5:15 p.m., Jerome called everyone to attention with a ridiculous amount of enthusiasm for a man who claims to dislike public speaking. He made a toast. It was 3.5 minutes long and entirely unrehearsed, and it was about the Tuesday I stayed 2 hours late to help him navigate his mother's home health intake paperwork, and the birthday donuts, and the soup, and the way I show up for people the way I show up for my patients, which is to say, completely, and without making them ask twice. I did not cry. I stood there with a glass of sparkling water, and I let the words land. At 6:45 p.m., Petra lit the 34 candles on the carrot cake. 43 people sang. I blew out all 34 candles on the first breath, which felt important. At 7:04 p.m., my phone lit up on the counter where I'd left it face down. I saw the notification from across the room, and I walked over and picked it up. It was a text from my mother. It said, "How are your plans going?" I looked at the room. Jerome was arguing with Petra about the playlist. Wanda was on her second piece of cake. B had found a connection with my cousin Diane, and they were deep in conversation in the corner. The gold and white balloons Jerome brought were moving slightly in the air from the side door that someone had propped open an inch. I typed back, "Really well. Hope Renata's party was beautiful." I put the phone back down. I went and got a slice of carrot cake. It tasted exactly like my grandmother made it. It tasted like being known. The calls started on Sunday. Not from my mother. First from my Aunt Rosalind, who is my mother's older sister and who lives in the same suburb and who I believe has a system for knowing things before she should. She called at 10:15 a.m. I answered. She said, "Diane told me about your party." I said, "It was a good time." There was a pause. Then she said, "Your mother is upset." I said, She said, "She feels like you were making a point." I said, "I had a birthday party, Aunt Rosalind. I'm 34. Another pause. She said, 9 people showed up to Renata's party. Your mother she's embarrassed. She spent a lot of money. I said, "I know what she spent." I did not say anything else for a moment. Then I said, Aunt Rosalind, did anyone call me on Saturday? Any member of my immediate family? Silence. Did anyone leave me a voicemail that said happy birthday? A text? A card that arrived in the mail? She said, Camille. I said, I'm not angry.
I want to be clear about that.
I had the best birthday I've had in a decade. I just want you to understand what the situation actually was. She said she understood. I believed her, mostly. My mother called on Monday at 7:44 p.m. I let it ring. She left a voicemail that was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long, which I know because I timed it before I listened. It was about disappointment and family loyalty and how I had embarrassed Renata by, and I am paraphrasing here, choosing to have my own thing on her day. That phrase stayed with me.
Her day.
September 14th. The day I was born.
Her day.
I listened to the voicemail once. Then I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote out, by hand on a piece of paper, everything I wanted to say back. I filled 2 sides of a page. Then I folded it up and I put it in the cedar box with the recipe card and Jerome's birthday card and my grandmother's letters. I did not send any of it. I called my mother back on Wednesday evening. I had thought carefully about what I wanted to say. I wanted to say it once, clearly, and not repeat it. I said, Mom, I'm glad Renata had a party. I hope she had a good time. I also had a birthday this year. 43 people came. Nobody from my family was there, not because I excluded anyone, but because I've spent 11 years waiting to be included, and I decided this year to stop waiting. That's not an attack on you. It's just a choice I made. My mother said, I didn't forget your birthday. I said, you called me on my birthday to ask me to help set up someone else's party. She didn't answer right away. She said, I thought you'd come. I thought you'd be there, and we'd celebrate both of you. I said, you didn't say that. You said you needed help with setup. Another silence. This one was longer. I have thought a lot about my mother's motivations, and I have landed, with some difficulty, on something that is not quite an excuse but is something I can hold without dropping. My mother organized her love the way someone organizes a limited resource, which is to say carefully, with the most going to the person who seemed most likely to run out. Renata has always seemed to be running out. Renata is louder about her needs, more insistent, more present at the front of every room. My mother has spent 40 years convinced that if she stops pouring into Renata, something will collapse. She is not a cruel woman. She is a frightened one. That does not make the 11 years of birthday candles disappear, but it makes them comprehensible. I said, I love you, Mom. I'm not ending anything. But going forward, I'm going to celebrate my birthday the way I want to celebrate it. And I'd love for you to be part of that if you want to be. But it will be a party that is actually mine. She said, what does that mean? I said, it means 43 people showed up to a basement on Fairview Street because they wanted to celebrate me specifically. I'd like that every year. You could be one of those people if you want. She cried a little. I let her. Renata called on Friday. I had been expecting this call the longest. She said, 9 people came to my party. I said, I heard. I'm sorry. She said, were you doing it on purpose? I thought about whether to be honest. I decided that 34 was old enough to be honest. I said, I was having my birthday party on my birthday. That's all I was doing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mom's been crying for 3 days. I said, I know. Renata said, I don't understand why you do this. I said, Renata, do you know how old I am? She said, 34. I said, what did you do for my 34th birthday? Silence. I said, not a judgment. I just want you to have the actual picture. She said, I've been busy. I said, I know. I let that sit there for a moment. Then I said, I had 43 people at my party. Jerome made a toast. Wanda brought chicken and dumplings. Petra lit the candles, and everyone sang. It was the best birthday I've had since Grandma was alive. I'm not angry at you. I just stopped waiting. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, 43 people? I said, 43 confirmed. 43 showed. She said, I didn't know you had 43 people. I said, I know. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. It was something like recalibration. I said, come next year if you want. Bring whoever you want. My table is open. She said she'd think about it. I believed her. It's been 6 weeks since September 14th. My mother came over for coffee last Tuesday. She brought a small plant, which is her version of an apology. We drank coffee at my kitchen table, and we talked about work and the weather and the new restaurant that opened on Hendricks Avenue, and at some point she put her hand on mine for a moment and said, I want to do better. I said, I know, Mom. I am not waiting for her to be different. I am not holding my breath for a transformation. I am not planning my next birthday around whether she chooses to show up. I am planning my next birthday around the 43 people who showed up without needing to be convinced. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. My grandmother gave me her carrot cake recipe and her cedar box and every single one of her birthdays for 31 years, and I didn't know until I stood in that basement with 34 candles what that kind of consistency had built inside me. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. I was managed for a very long time. I am not angry about it anymore. I have something better to do than be angry. Family without respect becomes entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot control. My mother did not know about the 43 people. She did not know about the cedar box, or the recipe card, or the string lights, or Jerome's toast. She did not know because I stopped performing my life for her approval and started actually living it. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. I understand my mother. I am not going to rearrange my September around her comfort. Real family does not test whether you can survive without them. Real family shows up. Jerome shows up. Petra shows up. Wanda leaves cards under doors. Diane calls to warn you without knowing she's warning you. That is the family I built across a decade, in the spaces where nobody from my original family thought to look. Losing an illusion is still better than living inside one. The cedar box is on my kitchen counter now, where I can see it. The recipe card is inside. The string lights are packed into a plastic bin in the basement for next year. I am already planning. If you have spent years waiting to be included by the people who were supposed to center you first, I want to ask you something. What would it look like to stop waiting and start filling your own table?